We are, this is the third year we are hosting the book club, and this is the first book of the year. And Florida, as you all know, has the distinct privilege of being the only state in the nation with an embassy in the nation's capital. And that is the part of our programming, is to connect and celebrate and champion Florida to the world. So this program is a part of that effort. And we have a really great treat in store for you today, because today we are going to meet with Professor Huguley, who is a professor at Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, where she lives with her husband and son. And she is a award-winning authoress of a lot of historical fiction books, but the book that we are talking about today is her newest book, and it's a book that has a great tie to the state of Florida. She has written a book about Ann Lowe, who was the fashion designer to the Social Register in New York. And we'd love to introduce Professor Huguley to you all. And I would like to ask you, Professor Huguley, to just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in the subject matter of Ann Lowe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Piper Huguley, and I wrote this book by her own design, which is a historical fiction novel about Ann Lowe. It was published last June, and I came across Ann Lowe because, like many people, I'm a fan of the Kennedys. So in terms of the Kennedys, I've always been interested in them. But of course, sort of wanted to know more particularly the ways in which the Kennedys have been affiliated with certain Black people in their lives, et cetera. So I was interested in terms of finding out more information about that. And I knew about certain things, like there was a Secret Service agent. I think the first African-American Secret Service agent was under Kennedy, et cetera. But in all the Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy biographies, there was always this mention of the family seamstress who put together her wedding dress, but sometimes maybe named, sometimes not, that I knew was an African-American. And so one night I was on social media, as one does, most particularly Twitter at this point. Now I guess it's 5 years ago, in 2018, where my editor retweeted an article about Ann Lowe and said, "Who will write this novel for me?" Now, I had been writing historical romance, but I had always known that the next step I wanted to go to for my writing would be writing novels about real life Black women who were unsung, not seen, or whatever. And I had been working on a particular topic for several years, but when I saw that and saw the article about Ann Lowe and looked up another few things, I thought, she's perfect. So, nerd that I am, I knew immediately that the day was the day after Charles and Diana got engaged. I'm such a nerd that I knew that I didn't even have to look it up. And so it made me wonder, as someone who was always chasing these famous commissions, what would she have thought about hearing that news? Because people who were around remember that Charles was like long in the tooth. Everybody had been looking for him to get married for a long time, all during the 70s. So when it finally happened, that whole notion of who was going to make this dress, and that whomever did it, their life was going to change. So I wrote the prologue to the book and sent it to my agent and said, "Tell Tessa I'm on this, do not give it to anyone else." And that's how I got the contract to write about her. So,
well, it is a great book. So here's the cover for those of you who haven't seen it. Really is a lot of fun. It's very, very well done. But you might want to talk to some people in our audience who have not read the book. Do you want to give a little short summary of what happens to Ann Lowe and who she is? And
sure. She was born in 1898, Jim Crow, Alabama. And she was the granddaughter, and apparently great-granddaughter of a tradition of women who had been enslaved, but who also living by sewing formal gowns and wedding gowns for the highest elite women in Alabama, most pointedly the wives of the state legislature, and even at some point the first ladies of Alabama. She got her training. And when she was 16, her mother died unexpectedly, and she had to finish the commission, the 4 dress commission for the first lady of Alabama. A bit of a child prodigy in terms of her sewing.
Betty, stop it.
Where she was
That's enough.
able to finish her first dress at the age of 8.
Wow.
So she was amazing in terms of what it was that she did. Sadly enough, she had entered into a child marriage when she was 12, but she received her freedom from that horrific situation when the wife of a citrus magnate came and spoke with her about sewing clothes for her and her 4 daughters. So for her, at that time in the late 19 teens, she was able to get a ticket, take her baby with her to Florida, to Tampa, Florida, where she sewed for the wives of the citrus magnates there, and earned her reputation as this very creative, innovative fashion designer. And ultimately, she designs for Roosevelt's, DuPont's, Vanderbilt's, all kinds of women in the social register, and most famously did the wedding gown for Jacqueline Bouvier when she married John F. Kennedy in 1953. So that's what the book is about. It's her journey from this very small town, rural place in Alabama to the social elite of the United States.
So one of the things that we like about it, obviously, is the focus on Florida and the fact that she was in Tampa. And I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't read it, but you do say that she at one point designed for crews for Gasparilla. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. And this is what another thing that amazed me. In terms of history, I mean, so many times you hear things about African Americans and they were, not treated a certain kind of way or whatever, but
Betty, stop it. That's enough.
Oops, let's mute. The Tampa elite, the wives of these citrus magnates, did not see her that way. So she was named officially the designer for the Gasparilla court for 24, 25, and 26, I believe. So yeah, it's just that when I found that out and did some more research about her, I was just saying she was really, really highly respected.
Which is so great. I mean,
her
her story is amazing. Now, in the book, you say that Mrs. Lee really encouraged her to go to New York and to obtain formal training and actually paid for that. Did that really happen?
That is true. That is true. Josephine Lee, who is the citrus magnate wife that I told her about, I guess they summered in Dothan, Alabama, which I drove through Dothan, Alabama. I'm not really sure I understand why, to say. That they would take vacation there, had a home there, and came across her while Ann Lowe was shopping in a department store, and asked where had she gotten her clothing. Now, Ann Lowe herself was not an outlandish dresser or whatever. Everything she would wear would be well done, right? But not showy, because all of the creativity and showiness that she felt would should go into the dresses that she did. But clearly Josephine Lee had an eye to be able to tell how well put together the dress was that she had on. And at such a time, that was a confrontation that could have been rife with all kinds of things. It could have ended in a different way entirely. But Josephine Lee saw what Ann Lowe had on and clearly respected it and wanted to know, So in the book, I fictionalize it a little bit. But from what I understand in terms of the actual encounter, that Ann Lowe admitted that it was her who.
So amazing.
who did the work. And she's like, well, I have these 4 daughters, including twins who are getting married. They need trousseau. They need wedding gowns. I don't know what I'm going to do. And for Ann Lowe, the truth of the encounter is that she was able to escape a horrific marriage that she had made when she was way young, somebody who was clearly exploiting her. And was able to find freedom, like I said, in Florida. That's where she found her.
Which is pretty cool. And is that where she really opened her first shop, Florida?
Yes, that is also
Now, do you know where that shop is? Is there a historic marker?
There should be, but I have had some. I've had some events in Florida and everything, and there is a team of readers who said they're trying to be on it and figure out where it is. In terms of that, because there should be something to mark what she had done, the accomplishments she was able to do in terms of not just the Gasparilla, but also the wives of the citrus magnates. And it's particularly Josephine Lee, who could have been, well, she only designs for me and my girls, so that's it. But she shared and allowed other people, allowed Anne to save her money and make her way in terms of what the dresses were for those wives of the citrus magnates. And as I had staked her so that she could go to school in New York, which was, I guess, the thing that you think you should do. Right. And of course, her experience with going to school, as I talk about in the book, was not necessarily a positive one.
Right. Hard. Another really hard experience. It's hard to read some of this, honestly. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. It's sad, but as it turns out, she already knew most of that stuff anyway. So
she was teaching the class.
Yeah, exactly. For her, for the training that she had from her mother and her mother's mother and her mother's mother's mother, all of that, handing it down in terms of what she had already had a completely thorough run. But the fact that Josephine Lee, as clearly a woman of great insight, saw her as the artist that she was and that she functioned. And I've had people talk to me in terms of, isn't this white saviorism? No, I see it as more that Ann Lowe was an artist and that Josephine Lee saw her art and she was her patron, as many artists have. And staked her so that she could make her way into the world beyond Florida. She had those hopes and dreams for her, which, when time came, that Josephine Lee was saying, it's fine if you want to, send dresses here, or we'll come up and see you or whatever, but you should be in New York.
Right. I do it. I mean, I know we're doing this story. This book, one part because it's February, it's Black History Month, but next month is Women's History Month. And I see this as a great girl power story too. Women helping women all the way through it, really. From the grandmother helping the mother to helping the daughter. There's a lot of, I really think it's a good story along those lines. There's a lot of wonderful grace and redemption. Did Mrs. Lee introduce Anne to E.F. Hutton? Mrs. E.F. Hutton, is that, you put that in the book? Is that a true thing too?
Yes, that is also true. Yes. So, like I said, she was not selfish about her, right? She was willing to, say, here's this wonderful designer, you should use her. It's just, like I said, an amazing story. And as I said before we talked, I said, I think that Ann Lowe viewed Florida as the home of her heart, even though she lived for many more years beyond that in New York, and that's where she died. I really think that Florida was a place of importance, great importance for her.
Well, it is nice for us to hear that she was well treated in Florida. At least your book certainly portrayed that. That is nice. It was good though that she had that connection with Mrs. Hutton, because when she hit New York, Mrs. Hutton could introduce her to all of her friends.
Yes, that is right.
I thought that was really quite interesting as well. Now, you said in the back of the book that you condensed the number of shops she had and you sort of streamed for the story and you streamlined the number of partners she had. Did she have several shops in Tampa or just one?
Well, in Tampa, we believed she operated out of the home at first, the Lee home, whatever, and then later on officially had at least one shop. but maybe, more than that. That's some of that ongoing research that I'm hoping that this story will plant a seed in, that maybe some University of Tampa student can take these things up, and look into them in order to create that comprehensive biography that Ann Lowe deserves as an artist. But in New York, definitely is what I'm talking about more in terms of her numbers of shops. She really, if you're considering during the time that she's in New York, from the 20s into the Depression and the 30s, etc., she had many, many, many shops that I could not enumerate for the purposes of a novel without readers potentially getting confused about that.
No, I understand that. So I wanted to know, did the Junior League of Tampa really have a dinner in her honor?
Yes, they did. Yes, they
That's
did.
very cool as well. When she was in her retirement, sort of, when she was late in life.
Yes. And as I said, whenever I got the contract, the editor who had looked at the outlines of what I was going to do and everything, and the outlines of her life, wow, she really had a very fascinating life, full of a lot of ups and downs, etc. I said, but I really want to make sure the book ends on a note of hope. And that's where I saw the ending point for the book, was in her return to the home of her heart, and the fact, as I talked about in that ending scene, in terms of the way Florida saw her, that they really saw her talents. And, she got the kinds of, like I said, the appointment of her as the designer for the Gasparilla Court in the 1920s, just really saw who she was and made sure that she, received titles and commissions, etc., to match what she was doing.
Which is pretty amazing. So in the title, you talk about how she's the designer for the Social Register, but in the book, you say she was actually listed in the Social Register herself.
That is true too. Yes. So that, ultimately the women of the Social Register had passed her name amongst themselves so frequently that ultimately she was included.
Which I think is also pretty cool. Yeah. And in the book, you describe her as a diminutive woman, and her nickname was Bird. But she was a woman of not only enormous talent, she had enormous courage. Yes. I mean, and perseverance, and she just overcame so much with such grace and forgiveness. I mean, it really is an amazing story. What an amazing person. And is it true she was a woman of great faith?
Yes. And I thought that was very important to sow that seed in terms of from the beginning, especially, in terms of considering, like I said, the horrific child marriage that she manages to escape and come out of, it's sort of when somebody has, this having to repeatedly overcome triumphs and tests and everything, what is it that holds it together? Is her faith. And the church that she went to, New York, still exists, and still, has their arms around her. I think I believe that is where she's buried. If it's not in your churchyard, it's some cemetery close to that church. So yes, her life is, I think, reflective of someone who was a person of great faith.
I agree. So for people who may not have read the book, do you mind describing the drama around Jackie O's wedding dress? Because really, I love the way you write the book, and you start off with this cliffhanger and then you flash us back. But this is a pretty amazing story.
That's an author's trick. I got to try to, reel you in and keep you hooked, so that you'll keep reading the pages. So one of the things that really did happen is that shortly before the wedding, like 10 days before the wedding, something happened in her shop. And the way she explains it is like she put the dress and all the bridesmaids' dresses out on figures to admire what she had done. And a pipe burst in the shop, caving in the ceiling, ruining all of the commissions, right? So that really did happen. And she really did have to make those dresses over again, right? The whole aspect of it, in terms of people who are seamstresses, say, okay, that's really hard. And then whenever you make a dress the first time, it's easier to make it the second time, but still, 50 yards of ivory taffeta, which is what Jacqueline Bouvier's dress was, yeah, still, it's like, wow, and that when she talks about it, she like says in a little southern way, I just cried and cried, but I got coffee and I just didn't go to sleep, and etc. So the belief though is that someone had a party the night before and that the bathtub continuously ran, and that's why it caved in. But the way I structure the book, I structure it as it's a whodunit. Somebody
Right.
purposefully did it to ruin the commission, and then there's a reveal about who it was in terms of that. So I won't spoil that, just to say.
No, that was good. Did she did she really go to Paris and report on Fashion Week?
Yes, she was, as I said, not as a fashion designer, but as a journalist, right? That this was how she got to go to Paris. Even as her mother and her grandmother back in Montgomery in her early years, said you should go, something that certainly for Black women of that time, place would seem you might as well go to outer space at that point in time, but that she ultimately did get to do. And it is also true that Dior admired her designs.
I mean, I just think that's amazing. I also thought it was very interesting that you explained that after the war, material it was no longer sort of viewed as a sin to use a lot of fabric. And so that's why the fashions became full again, because people could use fabric, was no longer rationed for the war effort. And so it would be okay to have these big gowns. I love the story about her designing Olivia de Havilland's dress that she wore when she accepted the Academy Award. Is there more to that story that's in the book?
Well, actually, the way I portrayed it in the book, it went better than how it actually went.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which I was unaware of. The way that I'm getting these things is that Ann Lowe, that I had known during the course of while I was doing the research, and I wrote this book during the insular time of the pandemic, so I couldn't go to where certain places were, etc. But one of the things I knew was that she made an appearance on the Mike Douglas show in 1964. If people remember the Mike Douglas show. I remember it because I was a kid, and when I would come home to the babysitter's house, she would always be watching it instead of cartoons. And we're always like, why doesn't she put on the cartoons for us? We don't want to watch Mike Douglas, right? So I was forced to watch Mike Douglas at a young age, and I knew where that tape probably was, but I couldn't get to it. But after the pandemic, I think in terms of her reputation and how more people have been talking about her, the National Museum of African American History and Culture put the tape on their website and then on YouTube where she is talking. It is in black and white. There's a fashion show, so you have to use your imagination for the clothes, but still, what she is able to accomplish is just stunning in terms of clothes. So I highly recommend, if you haven't Googled it, to go look at it.
Oh, I
All
will.
that is to say is one of the things that she was talking about in terms of, she talks about what happened with Jacqueline Bouvier's dress and everything, but also the fact that her initial connection to the family had to do with Jackie's mother.
Mm-hmm.
Who, was, as she said, like one of the most beautiful women in the world, which is a very interesting thing for her to say after the year after the assassination happened. It's clear that Mike Douglas wants her to talk all about Jackie, give us the tea, but she doesn't do that. And is very much every inch the Southern lady, which is what I thought.
Yes.
I looked at her
Yes,
life.
no, she seems very discreet, very lovely, only saying nice things. What an amazing woman, amazing role model for all of us. Where are her papers kept? And, in your book, you talk about how she kept a design swatch and a design book. And one of the things that you noted is that she never designed the same dress twice, ever. So that people always had a unique design, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah, and that is like sort of the heartbreaking part. Some of the things that people always ask me is about, what about her? Well, she had a son. Any of her other descendants, did they go into the business stuff? No, they didn't, right? And so all of that, when she retires in 1972, when she dies in 1981, her son had a daughter named Audrey, and Audrey had a daughter, and she had a daughter named Linda, and Linda still lives in New Jersey. But she talks about all they threw out. Oh, so heartbreaking. In terms of, so there aren't, I think I see in the chat, there aren't any papers per se. What exists is a scholar by the name of Margaret Powell, who I dedicated the book to, who was working on a comprehensive biography of her, managed to capture interviews with Audrey, per se. And she wrote her thesis when she graduated from the Corcoran School of Art about Ann Lowe, and she was a textile scholar who was working towards writing that biography when she tragically contracted breast cancer and died at a very young age of 38. Oh. But if she hadn't done that initial putting together research on certain dresses and the way that she talks about Ann Lowe's artistry in terms of how she put dresses together. Like one of the things I talked about was how Ann believed in not having VPL, visible panty lines, and building in a certain thing into the dress so the dress would fall right and have a certain line. Some of those other things, and like I said, not duplicating all of that is in the thesis, which is also out there online now. It wasn't before. I had to go and
find it. I know you're going to have an amazing. I don't think you're ever going to shake this book. You're going to have. I know you have this huge fan base now. In the back of the book, someone asked about where you got some material, and in the back near the end, you list some resources for further reading, which is good.
Yes.
And then I have not been, but I'm dying to go to the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C., because apparently there's really quite a lot about Ann there. Is that right?
There are some things about her there, but they have other things behind the scenes. And Linda, the great-granddaughter, has also donated what she had left to the museum. So, yeah, we're all hopeful that they'll do something with it, not just put it away.
Yes. And then, before our program went live, we were talking about an exhibit that's coming up at Winterthur. Mm-hmm. And can you tell us a little bit more about that? Those of us who might be interested in going to visit.
Yeah, so starting on September 9th, and I think to some point in January, next January in 2024, 40 gowns. This is the largest assembly it had. So earlier last year, the Met had 4 of them on display.
Okay.
As part of their, in the wake of what they do for the Met Gala and their fundraising. They had 4. Right now, down in Florida at the Henry G. Plant Museum, they have 2 from the 20s that are on display. They usually bring out, I think, from what it was explained to me annually, their what they have in terms of Gasparilla gowns from Ann Lowe. But for later this year, there will be 40.
That's amazing. Do you know where they came from? I mean, do you know who owned them?
All over. And this is how you know that she was an artist, is that when they come from all over, they're usually held in some museums. Like Ohio has some, and, Winterthur has some. There's some in New York. They're all over the place. But Winterthur is bringing them together, and then they're recreating Jacqueline Bouvier's wedding gown, which, as you probably know, is held by the Kennedy Library in Massachusetts. It is not on display anymore. They had it on display, but think 50 yards of ivory taffeta was the gravity was probably pulling on that thing. They had an artist reconstruct it out of paper. So if you go to the Kennedy Library, that's what you see. But for the Winterthur, the students, they are reconstructing the gown and not in a matter of days. So, wow. Yeah, if you follow them on Instagram, they have been posting some of their projects.
Instagram. Okay, that's very good to know. Now, in the book, you talk about how she had a design label, Ann Lowe Designs, but then she also designed under a label Sonia for Saks. Was that right? Did she?
Yes.
So would some of these 40 dresses be under the Sonia label? Do you know?
I don't know. And at least for the de Havilland Commission, it would be interesting if they got that, because one of the things she talks about in the Mike Douglas interview that stunned me about that dress, if you go look at it, is that it's hand painted with the flowers on it. She did not use a stencil to create those flowers from the bust line to the floor. It is all hand painted, which I'm like, I can barely draw a stick figure, and here she hand painted those flowers on fabric. I
I
mean,
know, I wore flowers tonight in her honor. So
yeah.
did she really make flowers as a child, just
Mhm.
cloth
That's how
flowers?
she got
And
started.
I mean, that was really true.
And
And
that's always her signature. There are other dresses where they're not floral, but that's like a signature of hers. And that's why there was so much in terms of the book, in terms of the way I thought about how she saw flowers, what that was. Even somebody who pointed out to me relatively recently the hymn that she sings to herself whenever she's escaping some of her trials and tribulations, about I come to the garden. Several of these things that I saw to weave in terms of how she saw flowers as playing a role in terms of how she wanted women to look.
and her love of beauty and natural beauty.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Really pretty amazing.
Very much so.
So we got a question in the chat box about how she supported herself during the Depression. And can you talk to us about that?
Well, part of this is that I was explaining when you like with the Sonia aspect, that when she wasn't able to have a shop, and something in terms of during the Depression, she would go under the auspices of someone else. So this is why I say for the Olivia de Havilland Commission, it's the Sonia label that's on that dress. It is not an Ann Lowe credited dress. So there were still wealthy women who were looking for, their gowns and stuff to be made. And she was one of those ones who was talented enough to be able to keep herself afloat in New York, still being someone who would put those designs together, and still work as a seamstress and all of that other kind of stuff. But yeah, that's how she kept herself afloat.
To me, it is such an American story. Someone who grows up in a little tiny town, goes off to New York, bright lights, big city, and really makes it. And
I completely agree, Mary. It is an American story. And I've even had men who have read it be able to see it and appreciate it in that same way.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. And I don't know, maybe you need to write a sequel. Maybe you need to write about all the different people she met, because you don't even have room in your book to list all the people.
Yeah, there was no way. And then, one of the things they talk about in publishing too is in terms of whenever you're publishing a book, is making it book club friendly, which means in terms of the length of this book, I was just pushing it in terms of how long it could be or whatever. It can't be but a certain length or book clubs won't want to read it. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, we thought this was a very book club friendly book. I'm just
thank you.
Everyone I know who's read it has just been so pumped. It's been really great. It's a great story. It was very nice for you to end it in Florida, and of course it portrays Florida in a happy light. But I mean, just an inspiring woman with all of her trauma, her art, her largesse, her personal character overcame all of that trauma, the horrific trauma she had, really, and horrible trials.
Yes, it really is amazing. And one of the plaudits I'm most proud of is that Parents Magazine listed it as a way for Black children or any children to learn about Black history. So yeah, I really appreciated, them saying that, because it's hard to get these things into, kids' minds or whatever, but that both for good and bad, it shows a lot about a particular historical time period.
It's impossible almost for us now, even for me, and to comprehend what she went through, much less the next couple of generations. It's just really hard. But I think you present it so well. So it's really terrific. So yes, so here she is from the South, and she accepted the fact that certain people, like Jackie O's sister, who did not choose her to design her dress, she accepted that with such grace, and she did not get to design the inaugural gown. I mean, but I love the way you portrayed that, because that did not destroy a relationship. She was very gracious about that. Now, do you want to talk about the IRS debacle or that whole aspect of the story?
Well, okay, I can say this in terms of that, one of the things that Ann Lowe was not good at was, managing her finances. So, it's a whole thing. Even when you go see the Mike Douglas interview, and Mike Douglas keeps asking, well, how much is that? How much is that? She's tossing out numbers because she's like thinking about all the fun she had, like getting that dress, together to where it was. She's not thinking about how much it costs, or in terms of the overwhelming labor that went into that dress and how much it should cost. So she was always undercharging, right, in terms of, which means that she always didn't have enough money to remain afloat, which is why, some of the reasons why she had several shops. And the IRS, they want their cut.
Well, but maybe Jackie O, helped her with that.
There's a whole aspect of when the IRS caught up with her. How did she get bailed out?
Right.
And all she ever learned was there was an anonymous benefactor who came along and paid the bill.
Right.
So the question has always been, was it Jacqueline Kennedy who did it, who was first lady at that time? Her husband was the president. The president is in charge of the U.S. Treasury.
Right.
So to me, it's like an Occam's razor, and some of you are like, no, it was Mrs. Lee, it's not known. But I think on Jackie's part, at that point, within 10 years after she designed the dress, when she was married, there was only one newspaper that mentioned Ann Lowe by name as the designer of the dress, that maybe she might have felt a little bad about, that she didn't stay,
I agree.
enough. Like with her White House wardrobe, we all know about Ole Cassini, right? And we say maybe she felt a little bad she didn't say openly enough that Ann Lowe had designed it, given the ongoing relationship that Ann Lowe had with her and her family since 1947. So they had already had quite a relationship for a few years. She was not just some random seamstress or some random person.
Now, my regret is that Ann Lowe did not keep a diary, because boy, wouldn't that be a great thing to mine about now?
It's one of those primary sources, and this is often the case for women who are busy. They're doing their thing. They're not writing stuff down, not thinking of themselves.
Right.
In terms of a history thing. And I think all she ever wanted to do was just make those dresses.
And we didn't even talk about the fact that she was nearly blind by the end of her life. I mean, just truly a remarkable story. And she's like a Beethoven, designer. Really, truly amazing. We are going to have to, I think, end our conversation, but you have piqued our interest. You have delighted us. This has been a wonderful story. We are so glad that you would spend your time this evening and the dinner hour talking to us about your book. I know you have several series, but you have a book coming out next year. Do you want to tell us briefly about that before we go?
Yeah, there's no Florida connection, but American Daughters is about the secret interracial friendship between the daughter of Theodore Roosevelt, the president, and daughter of Booker T. Washington.
I can't wait to read it. I just think that's
I call it, it's sort of like the daughter of large America and the daughter of the little Black America, kind of thing, that they had this friendship that lasted for decades during the course of the 20th century. And they had a lot of things in common. And so, that's what American Daughters is about. So
daughters of very famous people. Very interesting. I can't wait to read that. This has been the most delightful discussion. I will just remind our viewers that our next book club is coming up. This is the first of 4. We only do 4 a year. The next one is entirely different. It is going to be in person and on Zoom at the Bookmark in Neptune Beach. And the title of the book is Les Staniford's new book called Battle for the Big Top, P.T. Barnum, James Bailey, John Ringling, and the death-defying saga of the American circus. So it'll be an entirely different kind of book, but I hope you all will join in and join us. Thank you so much for supporting the book club. And don't forget to support your independent bookstores. And you can go to our website to see the bookstores that we're partnering with this year. Thanks so much, everyone. This was a wonderful night. Thank you again, Professor Huguley. Really great.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.